in the heart of a wide African village, where red earth breathed under bare feet and tall grasses bent under long winds, there lived a woman named Amari who was known for her quiet strength and her deep brown eyes that carried stories she never spoke. She was the wife of a respected hunter named Kalen, a man admired by elders, feared by wild beasts, and trusted by the village king. Every morning, the village woke to the sound of wooden pestles, pounding grain, the soft cry of goats, and the deep song of the river that curved like a sleeping serpent. Beyond the forest edge, at night, fires danced in front of round mud huts, and drums spoke to the ancestors in slow, heavy rhythms. Welcome to my channel, Black Woman Revenge Stories. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Amari lived a calm life, or so it seemed. Her hut was clean, her water pots full, her sleeping mat warm with the scent of dried grass. But inside her heart, there was a small shadow she could never name. It began the night Kalen returned from the Black Forest with a strange look in his eyes. The forest was old, and was said to be older than the ancestors, and older than the spirits. Even the bravest hunters entered it only when the moon was strong. That night the moon was thin like a broken smile, and the wind carried whispers that bent the trees. Kalen did not speak when he returned. He placed his hunting bag down and washed his hands in silence. His hands trembled just a little. Amari noticed, but said nothing. She warmed his food and placed it in front of him. He ate slowly, as if each bite carried a heavy thought. The fire between them flickered and cast moving shadows on the wall like watching faces. He did not sleep close to her that night, and the space between their bodies felt larger than the savannah. Days passed, and the village continued as it always did. Children laughed, women sang, and old men told stories near the fire. But Kalen changed. He started waking before the sun, and leaving without his spear sometimes. He walked toward the forest without looking back. Sometimes he stood near the river, staring into the moving water, as if waiting for a face to rise. Amari followed him one morning, hiding behind trees and tall grass, her heart beat like a drum calling for rain. She watched him kneel by an ancient baobab tree and place something small and dark at its roots. Then he whispered words that were not meant for human ears. That same evening, as the wind blew through the village and dust danced in small spirals, a stranger walked into the open space between the huts. No one saw him enter. It was as if the earth itself had pushed him up from the ground. His skin was pale as morning fog, and his eyes shone like river stones under moonlight. He wore a long robe made of woven black fibers, and tiny bones hung from his neck. The children grew silent, the dogs lowered their tails, the firelight bent away from him. The stranger looked directly at Amari. It felt as if he could see the shadow inside her heart, and touch it without moving. His voice when he spoke was soft, but heavy like thunder, held inside a mountain. He told her that her husband had made a huge mistake. He said the mistake was old and deep, and tied to the bones of the earth. Amari felt the air leave her chest. She wanted to ask what he meant, but her tongue froze. He stepped closer, and the smell of wet stone and old leaves filled her breath. He told her that not all hunters hunt animals, and not all forests are made of trees. He said some paths were opened when they should have stayed sleeping. He said some spirits were hungry not for meat, but for promises. Then he turned his back and began to walk away. The crowd slowly breathed again, but no one stopped him. No one spoke. His footsteps made no sound on the dirt, and when he reached the edge of the village, he simply faded into the tall grass as if he had never been there. That night the sky turned dark. Without warning, clouds gathered like black animals, circling a wounded prey. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and lightning cracked the sky into white scars. The drums were silent for once. The elders stayed inside their huts. Amari sat alone by the dying fire. Her thoughts moved like trapped birds inside her head. She remembered Kalen's shaking hands, his whispered words at the tree, and now the strange warning of a man who did not walk like other men. In the middle of the night, the forest screamed not like an animal, but like the cry of something old and wounded, a long, deep sound that rose from the roots of the world and shook the earth under the huts. Amari covered her ears, but the sound entered her bones. The goats broke their ropes and ran. The fires went out. One baby began to cry, and could not stop the stranger's words return to her mind again. And again, like a drumbeat, he made a huge mistake. She stepped outside her hut and looked toward the forest. The wind carried the smell of rotting leaves, and cold water. The tall trees moved, though there was no wind between them. The darkness seemed alive, and watching she felt small in the face of it. Yet inside her fear, a new feeling was born, a need to know the truth, even if the truth lived in the mouth of shadows. Behind her she heard footsteps. Kalen stood there barefoot, his chest rising fast. His eyes were wide with a fear he could not hide anymore. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, he looked toward the forest and fell to his knees in the dirt, his hands dug into the red earth, as if trying to hold onto something that was about to be taken. Far away in the forest, something moved through the undergrowth. It was not a beast, and it was not a bird. It moved like a slow breath through ancient roots and twisted vines. Its eyes opened in the dark, and they glowed a dull, hungry red. And as the thunder rolled again over the mountains, a voice older than any human throat whispered Amari's name into the night. And in that moment, she knew her life was no longer her own, and that the stranger had not come to warn her, but to awaken her to a truth that had been sleeping beneath her marriage, her village, and even the bones of the land. The forest did not sleep after that night. It breathed heavier, and the leaves whispered even when there was no wind. Amari felt it in her skin like cold fingers, brushing her arms. Every step she took around the village felt. Watch. The old women stopped singing by the river. The children no longer chased birds near the tall grass. Even the drums sounded weak, as if the hands that struck them were afraid of waking something. Kalen did not speak about that night. He moved like a shadow in his own home. His body was there, but his spirit felt far away. Sometimes he woke up screaming without sound, only breath and sweat and wide eyes. He stopped touching his hunting spear and left it leaning against the hut like a useless stick. Amari tried to reach him by touching his shoulder, but he pulled away as if her hands were fire. One evening, as the sun sank like a red wound into the land, a group of village elders gather. Eid under the sacred Iroko tree, their faces were carved with age and wisdom, and their eyes held the reflection of many seasons. The oldest among them, Baba Nyoka, called Amari to sit in the dust before them. He did not smile. His voice was slow and heavy like wet soil after rain. He told her that the forest had changed its breath, and the ancestors were restless. He said they had felt a ripple in the spirit world, as if a forgotten door had been pushed open. Amari felt her heart tighten, but she stayed silent. She thought of the stranger and his warning. She thought of the red eyes in the forest, and the voice that spoke her name. Baba Nyoka leaned closer to her and said that such disturbances are often tied to blood promises. He said, when a hunter breaks an old oath, the land itself can begin to cry. He asked her if Kalen had gone somewhere forbidden. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing, because she still loved him, and love can be a chain stronger than iron. That night, Kalen left the hut without food, without spear, without looking back. Amari followed him again, but this time she did not hide well. He reached the baobab tree and turned. Suddenly his eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a man drowning. He told her to go back. He told her the forest was no longer a place for living people. He told her that he had done something that could not be undone, but he did not say what. His voice broke like dry wood underfoot. Before she could ask more, the wind rose and carried a low sound through the trees, a sound like thousands of dry bones shaken together. The ground felt cold under their feet, and the bark of the tree turned dark like wet blood. Kalen dropped to his knees again and began to cry, real tears that fell into the dust. Amari felt her own tears rise, but she held them inside like sharp stones. From behind the tree, a shape began to form. It was tall and thin, and its body looked like woven shadows. Its eyes were holes of deeper darkness. Its long arms moved as if pulled by an unseen water current. Kalen bowed his head and pressed his forehead into the dirt. The thing stopped before him, and the air around it smelled of old graves and forgotten rain. It spoke without a mouth, and its voice entered the mind like cold water. It reminded Kalen of a promise made when he was young and desperate. It showed him images of a younger self lost in the deep forest, wounded and starving. It showed him offering something sacred in exchange for life. It showed him a spirit hand, taking that offer and disappearing into the roots of the earth. Amari saw the images too, not with her eyes, but inside her mind like a burning dream. She understood then that her husband's mistake was older than their marriage, older than their hut, older than their shared laughter. It was a debt written in spirit blood, and whispered into the roots of the forest, the shadow being lifted its long arm, and pointed at Amari. A cold weight fell over her heart. It did not want Kalen alone, it wanted what was dearest to him, and she was that thing. The spirit moved closer, and the trees bent inward, as if listening. Its voice grew louder inside their heads, and it said the debt was waking, and it was tired of waiting. Kalen screamed then, and grabbed a stone from the ground. He tried to strike the spirit, but the stone passed through like smoke. The shadow did not move, it only leaned closer and pressed its cold presence around them like a closing door. Suddenly the night filled with a strange sound. It was soft at first, like footsteps on dry leaves. Then it grew into a steady rhythm, a drum. But no human hands touched a drum. The sound came from deep inside the forest, from the direction of the Forbidden Hills, where the first ancestors were said to have walked before they became stars. The shadow spirit stopped, its form trembled, as if it too felt fear. It turned its hollow eyes toward the sound, and slowly began to fade into the darkness like smoke, pulled back into the ground. The trees straightened, the air warmed a little. Kalen fell forward into the dirt, exhausted, shaking, broken. Amari knelt beside him. She did not touch him, but she stayed close enough to feel his breath. She knew now the truth was larger than her pain, and older than her love. She knew the stranger had been right, but she also knew something else. Whatever lived behind that debt was not finished. Far away, the drum sound continued, slow and deep, like a heartbeat of the land itself, and with every beat the forest seemed to lean closer to the village, as if the trees were beginning to walk. The morning came, but it did not bring comfort. The sun rose like a pale eye behind a curtain of dust, and the air felt thick like it had swallowed smoke. The village moved slowly, as if walking through water. Every sound felt louder, every shadow felt longer. Amari sat outside her hut and watched the sky while Kalen lay inside, breathing, but not truly resting. The strange drum sound from the forest did not stop with the night. It continued through the morning, through the heat, through the slow passing of clouds. It was not heard with ears alone, it was felt in the chest, and in the soles of bare feet. The elders gathered again under the Iroko tree, and this time their faces showed fear. Baba Nyoka spoke to the sky, as if asking the ancestors for words. They burned bitter herbs, and the smoke curled in shapes that looked like twisted hands. Amari felt something pulling her toward the forest, not like a rope, but like a quiet calling from deep inside her bones. She thought of the stranger, she thought of the shadow spirit, she thought of the promise made before her time, and she realized she could no longer sit and wait like a river that breaks its banks when the rains are too heavy. She stood up and walked toward the tree line. The forest welcomed her with cold shade, and the scent of wet earth. The leaves above her blocked the sun, and the roots beneath her feet twisted like sleeping snakes. Every step deeper made the village feel farther away. She heard no birds, only the far, slow drum that had now grown louder, like a heartbeat that was not her own. As she walked, she saw marks on the tree trunks, old symbols carved by hands long turned to dust, spirals, lines, circles, and shapes of animals that looked half real, half spirit. Some glowed faintly. As if remembering old fire, she touched one and felt warmth run through her fingers and into her arm like a path opening inside her. Soon she reached a clearing she had never seen before. In the center stood stones arranged in a circle. Their surfaces were covered in moss, but clean as if unseen hands kept them that way. The ground inside the circle was bare of grass, and the air felt heavy and sacred. She stepped inside, and the world shifted. The forest sounds dropped into silence, and even the drums stopped. From the opposite side of the circle, the stranger appeared again. He did not walk into the clearing, he was simply there. As if pulled from mist, his robe moved without wind, and the small bones around his neck made a soft, hollow sound. He looked at her with eyes full of things too old to name. He told her she was not dreaming, and she was not lost. He said the land had chosen her, because her spirit was not broken by comfort. He revealed that he was not a man of the village, or of any living tribe. He was a watcher between worlds, one who walked the thin line between the ancestors and the breathing. He said the mistake Kaelin made was not only a broken promise, but a theft. He said Kaelin had taken fire that did not belong to humans, fire that was meant to sleep under the roots of the oldest tree. He showed her a vision of a young Kaelin lost and bleeding in the forest, surrounded by darkness, and cold with only fear to guide him. Then a small blue flame appeared before him, floating above the ground like a trapped star. A spirit offered him that flame in exchange for a future payment, a payment that would come when his heart was full and his life felt complete. Amari felt pain tear through her heart, but she stood still. The watcher told her that the time of payment was near, and the debt had woken. He said the shadow being she saw was a collector of broken oaths bound to the old forest spirits, and older than any king. If the debt was not settled, the forest would take back what was stolen by swallowing the village one breath at a time. She asked in a voice that felt like it did not belong to her, why she was involved. Why not take Kaelin alone? The watcher looked at her softly and said, because love binds souls tighter than chains. He said Kaelin had named her in his heart when he made his silent prayer years ago, and the spirit world heard that name. The ground beneath the stone circle began to hum a low vibration like distant thunder. The air shimmered, and the trees leaned inward, as if listening again. From the shadows between the stones, small lights began to appear. They were tiny blue flames like the one from Kaelin's vision. They hovered in the air and moved in slow circles around her. They did not burn, they felt cold and warm at the same time. The watcher told her these flames were fragments of the stolen fire, and that only someone untouched by the promise could carry them without being destroyed. He held out his hand, and one flame drifted into her chest, not burning, not hurting, but settling inside her like a living star. She felt both fear and strength rise together, and she knew she was no longer just a wife of a hunter. She was now part of something older than names. Behind her in the distance, the drum began again, louder, faster, and closer. And far away, the shadow collector felt the change. It turned its attention toward the forest clearing and began to move. Amari took a deep breath. The watcher vanished like mist, and she stepped out of the stone circle carrying the cold blue fire inside her heart as the forest began to stir around her. The forest changed the moment Amari stepped back onto the hidden path. The air grew heavier, and the light turned strange, as if the sun was afraid to look down. The leaves whispered louder, and every root beneath her feet felt like a slow-moving thing. She could feel the cold blue fire inside her chest, like a second heartbeat, one that did not belong to her ancestors, but to the ancient earth. As she walked back toward the village, the drum sound grew faster and closer. It was no longer slow and distant. It beat like a warning, like a cry for war. The trees began to bend inward, and the shadows between them stretched like long fingers reaching for her. She could feel the presence of the shadow collector moving through the forest, not seen, but felt like cold breath on the back of her neck. When she reached the edge of the village, the sky turned the color of old ashes, and a bitter wind moved through the tall grass. The huts stood silent. The smoke from the cooking fires rose straight into the air without movement, as if time itself was holding its breath. Children hid behind doors, and animals pressed themselves flat against the ground. The elders stood together in a circle holding carved staffs and whispering prayers to the ancestors. Kaelin stood in the center of the village with his hands bound by vines. His eyes were filled with shame and fear and love. All mixed together, the elders had learned of his broken oath through dreams and visions sent by restless spirits. They had tied him not to punish him, but to keep him from running into the forest and offering his life before the truth could be faced. Amari walked toward him slowly. Every step felt like it belonged to a different world. The blue fire inside her stirred when she looked at his face. She saw not only the man she married, but the boy he once was lost, and bleeding and desperate. She wanted to touch him, but the air between them felt thick like a wall of unseen water. Before any words could pass between them, the ground began to shake, a deep, slow trembling that moved through dust and stone. The drum sound grew so loud, it felt like it would tear the hearts out of chests. The earth cracked near the edge of the village, and from that crack rose cold, dark mist that rolled across the ground like crawling smoke. From within that mist, the shadow collector emerged. It was taller, now wider and more solid. Its body no longer looked like woven darkness, but like a moving wall of night. Its eyes burned red like slow coals buried in ash. Wherever it stepped, the grass turned gray, and the air turned bitter. The villagers dropped to their knees. Some covered their eyes, some cried out the names of their ancestors. The shadow collector spoke without a mouth, and its voice fell over the village like a heavy blanket. It called out the debt, it called out the broken promise, it called the name of Kaelin, and the name of Amari. It said the time had come to collect what was owed to the old forest fire. It said the stolen flame must be returned along with the heart that had been named as payment. Kaelin struggled against the vines and screamed that they should take him instead. He begged the spirit to leave Amari. He said he would walk into the forest and never return. He said he would give his bones to the roots and his blood to the soil. The shadow collector did not care. It moved closer to Amari, and the blue fire inside her began to burn brighter. The air around her shimmered, and the ground beneath her feet warmed. The spirit world was waking to her presence. The elders looked at her with fear, and Baba Nyoka felt the change and whispered that the ancestors were stirring behind her steps. The cold blue flame pushed forward inside her chest and rose to the surface like light pressing through skin. Her eyes reflected its glow, even though no one else could see the fire. The shadow collector raised its long arm and reached for her. The wind howled, and the huts groaned. The sky darkened even more, and the distant mountains disappeared behind a wall of dust. It was at that moment that the Watcher appeared again. He stood beside Amari without sound and placed an unseen hand on her shoulder. He did not speak with words, but his presence filled her heart with calm. She understood what had to be done without being told. The stolen fire could not be taken back by force. It had to be offered freely by the one who now carried it. The price was not death, but truth. She stepped forward, away from Kaelin, away from the circle of elders, and faced the shadow collector directly. The blue fire burst from her chest like a cold sunrise. It did not burn the air, it did not harm her. It hovered between her and the spirit like a floating star. The entire village was washed in its pale light. The shadow collector stopped moving. It leaned back slightly, as if meeting something it respected. Amari spoke with a voice that was both her own and not her own. She said the fire would be returned, but not with fear and not with sacrifice born from despair. She said the forest had given life when there was none, and now it would be given gratitude instead of blood. She offered the flame without chains, without threats, without lies. The shadow collector hesitated. It had never been offered a debt in such a way. The old rules were being touched, the ancient balance was being tested. The ground stopped shaking, and the wind began to slow. But the spirit was not yet satisfied, and the greatest test was still to come. The air stood still as the blue fire floated between Amari and the shadow spirit. The whole village held its breath. The grass no longer moved. Even the birds were silent. The shadow collector leaned closer. Its dark body stretched wide, covering the sky above them. The blue flame trembled slightly as if it could feel the weight of the ancient power before it. Kaelin cried out her name. His voice was weak but full of pain. He struggled against the vines that held his hands. He wanted to run to her. He wanted to pull her back, but he could not move. The elders remained frozen. No one dared to speak. The shadow spirit spoke again inside every mind. It said that a flame returned without pain would make the forest weak. It said that debts without blood would make the old laws meaningless. The wind grew sharp again, and dust rose from the earth in slow, angry waves. Amari felt fear but did not step back. The blue fire pushed stronger inside her body like a river of cold light. She saw visions not of terror but of life. She saw green leaves after rain. She saw children running through tall grass. She saw rivers dancing under the sun. She saw drums calling joy instead of war. The Watcher stepped forward beside her. He lifted his hands to the sky. The air shimmered as the ancestors began to stir. Shapes of light appeared behind the huts. They looked like shadows made of stars. The spirits of the old ones had heard the truth in Amari's heart. The Shadow Collector felt this shift. It turned its burning eyes toward the spirit shapes. For the first time, its form flickered. It had come expecting fear and blood. Instead, it found courage and truth. The ground cracked once more, but this time light came through the cracks. Soft, pale light that smelled like rain and new soil. The blue fire began to rise higher into the air. It started to pull away from Amari not with pain, but with peace. The shadow spirit lifted its long arms and tried to draw it back, but the Watcher raised his voice and spoke words older than stone. The ancestors echoed the words. The wind changed direction. The trees leaned outward instead of inward. Kalen collapsed to the ground as the vines fell from his wrists. He crawled toward Amari and pressed his forehead to the earth. He did not touch her. He only whispered that he was sorry. He whispered that he had been weak when he should have been strong. The blue fire burst brighter. It expanded across the sky above the village. Every face was washed in cold, gentle light. The Shadow Collector began to shrink. Its tall form started to thin. It was being forced to choose between old hunger and new balance. But the forest was not finished testing them. From the edge of the trees, a deeper darkness began to rise, older than the Collector, slower, heavier, a presence that made even the shadow spirit tremble. This was the heart of the forest itself waking, and it began to move toward the village. The forest heart moved slowly, but nothing could stop it. The ground trembled as roots shifted beneath the village and the sky darkened like a closing eye. The Shadow Collector stepped back for the first time in its long existence, because even it feared what was rising from the old earth. The air smelled of rain dust, and something older than memory. Amari stood firm, even though her legs wanted to bend. The blue fire no longer floated outside her body. It spread through her veins like light flowing through a river. She felt no pain, only strength, and deep knowing. Kalen crawled closer, but did not touch her. His tears fell into the soil, and the soil drank them as if the land itself was listening. From the forest, a massive shadow rose, not shaped like a spirit or beast, but like the outline of a mountain made of darkness. It was the will of the land. It was the ancient balance. It did not speak with words. It spoke through the shaking ground and the moving wind. The trees bent low, as if greeting their oldest ancestor. The Watcher raised his hands once more and called to the ancestors. The spirits of the old warriors, kings, queens, and mothers appeared brighter than before. Their light pushed gently against the deep forest shadow, not as enemies, but as children returning home. The blue fire inside Amari lifted out of her chest one last time and moved toward the great forest presence. This time there was no fear and no struggle. The flame was not stolen anymore. It was offered with honesty and respect. It touched the forest heart, and instead of burning, it softened. It spread through the roots of the trees, through the deep soil, and into the river that curved like a serpent near the village. The Shadow Collector began to dissolve, not in pain, But in rest, its hunger ended because the debt was no longer poisoned by fear. The sky slowly opened, the dark clouds pulled apart, and warm light returned. The wind softened, the grass lifted its head again, birds returned to the trees, and sang songs that had not been heard in many seasons. The great forest presence faded back into the roots, leaving behind peace. Kalen stood slowly. He walked to Amari, and this time she did not step away. He fell to his knees before her. And before the land, he did not speak excuses. He did not blame fear. He simply laid his hands on the earth and promised to live with truth. He understood that life taken through shortcuts always calls for payment. The elders approached and saw that the spirits had chosen a new balance. They untied fear from their hearts and replaced it with wisdom. Baba Nyoka lifted his staff and blessed the land, not with words of pride, but with words of humility. The watcher gave one final look to Amari. His eyes showed pride without pride and respect without fear. Then he vanished like morning mist under sunlight. The village returned to life, but it was not the same life. It was a better life, one that remembered that the earth listens, one that knew promises are not just words, one that understood that power taken without respect brings darkness closer with every breath. Amari walked each morning to the edge of the forest. She no longer feared the trees or the shadows. She knew now that the land was not an enemy, but a living spirit that must be honored. She knew that true strength was not in weapons or fire, but in honesty, courage, and respect for the unseen world. And so the moral of the story lived in the hearts of the people from that day forward. A person must never take what is not theirs through fear or desperation, for every stolen gift becomes a curse, and only truth, humility, and respect for the spirits can turn darkness back into light.